Let's just turn over to 1 Peter chapter 4. Starting in verse 1. I've been focusing here of late on trying to have the right perspective and outlook and gentleness towards these people and kind and love. And, there's a proper blend, because out here in the world you say, oh, if you love them, you won't hurt their feelings or you'll let them do. That's not love. But there's also that point where we must not allow ourselves to be frustrated in the flesh and then allow that to meter down to those that we're around. And Jesus said, this is how they'll know you're my disciples, is the love you have for one another. The fact that you care. It may appear like, oh, well, they're all up in my business. Well, why are they in your business? It's not a point. It should never be a point. And most of the time, I think down deep in our hearts, when we're trying to be that person to try to help them, it's not really that we're trying to meddle in their business and stick our nose in. It's we care. We're just doing it in a fallible way at times. But also the perspective that most out here walk with, they're not looking at the right goal. And verse 1 says, therefore, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same purpose, because he has suffered in the flesh. He who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. If you're going to walk the way Jesus walked, as he said in John and as he said in the Gospels, especially at the last time whenever he was with his disciples just before the crucifixion, he said, don't expect anything less than what they're doing to me. If you're my people, this is how you're going to be treated. You're going to be maligned. You're going to be accused. You're going to be, people are going to get offended at you. And he says, be careful that you're not giving a reason for offense in yourself. But people's going to be offended at the word. But we need to have his Spirit so guiding us that we know how to check ourselves at the door and allow his Holy Spirit to deal with whatever situation. Sometimes it's a time for us not to say a word and just pray about it. And maybe we're not the ones to address this person this way. Each one of us pastors mentioned in previous sermons, that his children, all of them are precious to him, and all of them share a unique bond with him that the others don't share in certain aspects. And it's that way with the Father. Each one of us is a certain member of that body. We're precious. He died just for us, but we'll have that unique fellowship if we'll give ourselves to him in fellowship. We'll have that unique fellowship no one else can have, because there's something in common. Like he knows a name that only us, we and him will have it in the kingdom. How precious is that? Verse 2, so as to live the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for the lust of men, but for the will of God. For the time already past is sufficient for you to have carried out the desire of the Gentiles, having pursued a course of sensuality, lust, drunkenness, carousals, drinking parties, abominable idolatries. Basically what he's saying is, what we've done in the past, that's sufficient. We shouldn't follow that anymore. We've done enough in the past. Let's carry on for the future. There's no sense in putting more time and effort into those things, into chasing those things. As David said last night, whenever he was younger, he opposed God in his actions. He opposed God in his mind, and he went out and tried to wreck himself, basically, is what he was doing. And whenever it came to that climax and the Lord ministered to him, he didn't want to do that no more. And we find, like Paul said, we fight in our members. Sometimes we find ourselves still falling back into little pitfalls. But the point is, our aim is towards the goal, the cross, Jesus, his will. The whole time that Christ was in this ministry, and when Paul said, oh, well, they're not going to kill you, and he said, this is the whole reason I'm here, and you're going to deny me that? I'm here for this purpose. You're not going to stop it. We're here also, whether we're crucified in a martyrdom like our brothers and sisters across the world, or if we're every day sacrificing and crucifying our own flesh and we live to 50, 60, 80 years old and then pass from natural causes. The still point is we're sacrificing our carnal flesh and crucifying it every day, like Paul said, to walk faithfully for his purpose, to be qualified. We will be qualified if we're faithful to the end. So many people say, oh, well, let's go with God to get stuff. That's the wrong reason. We should go with God because he deserves it. He loved us when we were railing against him, when we were spitting in his face. Verse 4, and in all this they are surprised that you do not run with them to the same excess of dissipation, and they malign you. You know, if you're not, especially if you've been around them people before, if you're not doing the same thing you are now, oh, well, you goody, blah, blah, this and blah, blah, that. They're trying to get you to break weak so they don't feel so guilty. The mirror's not shining saying, hey, you can change your life. Christ can change your life. You don't have to be that disreputable, miserable person that's bent on self-destruction. They don't want that. It hurts. Verse 5, but they shall give account who is ready to the judge, but they shall give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For the gospel has for this purpose been preached, even to those who are dead, and that though they are judged in the flesh as men, they may live in the spirit according to the will of God. That's the purpose, according to the will of God in the spirit. We can't do it without the spirit. We can't do it. We can't be faithful in our walk unless we do, as David said in Psalms 1, meditate upon his law, on him, spend that quality time with him every single day, morning, noon, night, all the way through. Because when we spend more time feeding the wrong wolf inside of us, we're going to blow tempers. We're going to be cruel to somebody that doesn't need it, that they're really begging for help or in pain or whatever the thing is. We're not going to be so sensitive to the Spirit to say, hey, John, do this, or hold up and just pray. We won't hear it. We won't even pay it no mind because we haven't devoted enough time to know his will, know him intimately that day. You know, it was pointed out previously several times. Michael, I think, said it here in the Bible study here. But whenever Jesus, through Moses, was directing the children of Israel on the manna, you know, they got manna each and every single day. New manna, fresh manna. They weren't to keep, and if they kept it, it just got wormy and rotten. Well, our manna is his presence. Our manna is his word and his instruction. We can't let it get stale, stagnant, and rottenness. It corrupts. It doesn't do any good. He is so careful and precise for a reason in his instructions. We may think, well, that's going a little overboard, or really he doesn't really mean that to that point. There's a purpose why he says what he does. We may not ever understand it fully until we're in the kingdom. Verse 7, the end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be of sound judgment, sober in spirit for the purpose of prayer. Above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without complaint. Remember what happened when Aaron and Miriam were complaining about Moses. She got struck with leprosy. They had no call to do that. Not only was he the appointed leader that God ordained, but he was also a fellow brother. And they're going to gripe and complain and murmur. That's why most of Israel perished in the wilderness, because whether it was Moses or whether it was God, they were all griping the whole time. They couldn't receive anything without griping. If you're praising him, you can't get frustrated and gripe. There's no way. There's no place, there's no house for both of them. You're either praising him or you're not praising him, and this is what happens. Jesus embraced the cross. And for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. Even though we see he prayed 3 times, Lord, if there's any other way for your will to be done, let it, because he didn't want to be separate from the Father. They'd been together from millennia, from the They didn't have a time. They didn't have a start of time to that point. He didn't want to be separated. He didn't want to bear the shame. But he knew, and he loved his Father and us so much that he's like, if that's what it takes, then fine. And he did it with joy. I try to put myself in those shoes all the time. If somebody was beating on me, railing on me, ripping my beard out, keeping me up all hours of the night, would I have the Spirit of the Lord to not defend myself? Would I have the Spirit of the Lord to not want to handle that in the flesh? I've been there to a minor scale, and I can tell you the flesh was trying to rule. The Spirit finally won out. And that was because God kept me in his grasp. He knew my heart. I didn't really want to do that. It is not easy. Jesus did it flawlessly. He did it without sin. He did it without even a hesitation. That's the love that changes lives. That's the love and witness that we go out in the tent meetings, whether they come or not. It's either a witness to or against. Verse 10, as each one has received a special gift, employ it in the serving of one another as a good stewards of the manifold grace of God. Whoever speaks, let him speak as it were the utterances of God. Whoever serves, let him do so as by the strength which God supplies, so that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belongs the glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. Whatever function we're doing, we don't need to get arrogant. We don't need to seek approval. Our approval should come from the Heavenly Father. If someone has given us thanks for it, it says thank you for doing that, it's good for them. It's good for us as long as we keep that in perspective. But if we start getting, then we're doing it for the wrong reasons. We're no longer serving God in it. We're serving ourselves. And it's a tricky slope. The enemy is very cunning on that. Verse 12, beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you which comes upon you for your testing, as though some strange thing were happening to you. But to the degree that you share the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also the revelation of his glory you may rejoice with exultation. When I was a kid, I'd read Paul and Silas's account. I don't know if I could do that. Just being stoned to death, drugged to the end, and then the first thing that I come conscience, immediately, thank you, Lord. The flesh says that's just crazy, but that's the way we should be. We should so be intertwined that we know it's for a purpose. Look at Joseph. Everything that happened to Joseph, you never see him complain. And he said, and you can almost see it in his mind. He's like, well, I'm going to do the best I can in this situation. He never says, God, why did you put me here? God, why this? Well, God, why that? He said, well, I'll just do the best I can. When he went from being the favorite child to wanting to be killed, to thrown in the pit, to sold in slavery, to accused falsely, to thrown in prison, forgotten about in prison. That's what qualified him to finally be Pharaoh's second in command and to save all his people. We can be that vessel that reaches our whole family, for or against. We don't want to be a witness against, but some people just won't refuse. They're not called to be the bride. They won't receive the call. They won't be happy with it. Like Pastor said, they would rather have a fig tree. Or maybe they don't even want that. Maybe they just hate God so much they've let the enemy rule their lives that they're his enemy. But let it not be on our account that they fall short and don't get the witness. Verse 14, if you are reviled for the name of Christ, you are blessed because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. By no means let any of you suffer as a murderer, or thief, evildoer, or troublesome meddler. What it's saying here is don't suffer in vain. By no means, don't suffer in vain. Don't suffer for some foolish fleshly thing or something you're chasing, whether it's some evil like this or something out in the world that may not on the face of it be that evil. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not feel ashamed. The devil can shackle you with shame so easily, and it's not rightly ours. Jesus wore the shame on the cross for us. It's not ours to keep. But in that name, let him glorify God. For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. And if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? He looks to us. He looks to his own house. And if we're right, then we can properly minister to those that will become part of his house. If we're muddying the waters, it's harder for him to work. The scripture says it's greater to win back a brother or anyone that's offended than taking a walled city. The damage is almost irreversible. Let us not be guilty of that. That doesn't mean we go la, 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 and we're friends with everybody, because that we can't be friends with the world. But we don't have to attack them either. We can say, hey, don't do that. You're destroying yourself. That's not what God created you for. As Pastor said at the tent, we're not doing any of this for people. And if we are, we're doing it for the wrong reasons. What he told Parish Reedhead, I didn't send you out there for me or for them. I sent you out there for me. I sacrificed my son. It's for me that you're out there being the witness. And we'll close at the end of this chapter. For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. And if it begins with us first, I just read that, sorry. And if it is with difficulty, verse 18, that the righteous is saved, what will become of the godless man and the sinner? You know, it is a sad state to see someone who will not give themselves to God, and they think they're all cool, and you know the outcome. You know the outcome they're going after. They've suffered in this world, just like it said, don't be suffering for needless causes, and then they're going to suffer until they're destroyed with the lake of fire. How wasteful is that? Because that is God's beloved child who would not respond to him, would not turn to him. He has such love that it doesn't matter. We can be his child for a long time, go away and do despicable things. All we got to do is turn around and he receives us. He runs and embraces us and treats us just as if we had never done it. There's no record of it. Verse 19, closing. Therefore, let us all who suffer according to the will of God entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in what is doing right. Our souls are in him. By his power are we held together, just as the same with the enemy. We shouldn't have to wonder, is he careful to watch over us? He sacrificed his own son and he didn't have to. That should tell us enough. We shouldn't ever let the devil throw those lies in. Well, God, he abandoned you. You must have did something to tick him off. Is he that petty? He's not that petty, because look at what he's still suffering, as David put out today. He's still willing to endure his creation, attacking him daily until that last measure is measured up. For those few people that throughout however much time we have left will come to him, truly. That's what he's waiting on. It says it in Revelations. They said, what about the blood that we've shed? When are you going to avenge it? He said, not until the last drop is in the bowl. Not until that last drop is measured up. It's the same as the blood of Christ. We are just carrying out what Jesus did. It's no difference. Praise God.